we're going to do this a little bit differently because what I have for you is a hyper scuff build that is literally just a proof of concept for the thing that I've been talking about months ago that ultimately I didn't think actually could function. So I'm just going to go through. I'm in a tier 57 dungeon right now. My gear is completely scuffed, like absolutely horrible for the current setup that we have. And I just kind of want to show you all, you know, maybe a cool version of Infinimist that you should probably get used to seeing. Because right now, a lot of innovation in Infinimist is trying to figure out how to stack enough crit damage onto the build to make the Shadow Blight proc actually do enough single target damage. And the idea is like, well, you need to hyper function and worry about being able to get enough lucky hits, to be able to get like enough corpses on the ground to do enough shadow damage. And that's not wrong. That is basically the primary way or primary mode of being able to increase the base Infinimist damage. And then when we had put out our build guide, you notice that we had already been focusing on crit damage because the Shadow Blight proc does a ton of damage. But more and more people who have been experimenting with the build are like, how can we possibly get this more crit damage onto this build? Because Shadow Blight's proc does so much damage. And that's a completely accurate and appropriate way of like trying to think about innovating the build next. But it turns out that there had been this little idea of a build way back in the day. Echo, Hack, and I had kind of theory crafted this and come up with, you know, what are the potential ways that we could actually implement the build, because Infinimist is so strong, but its big issue is that single target damage. And that's the question that a lot of people have been trying to answer very recently. And the answer was something that we had thought about a very long time ago. And it was Bone Spirit. Bone Spirit is like the king of doing single target damage, right? That's kind of the whole point of Bone Spirit, is that it walks up and it one-shots stuff. And if you're really worrying about like how to get enough damage onto the Shadow Blight build to make it so that you can like reasonably expect to be able to kill very tanky monsters or bosses, or, you know, speed up kill time, you really didn't have to look that far or that hard. The answer was just Bone Spirit. Oddly enough, Bone Spirit fits really well onto the Infinimist build, because the Infinimist build is a build that doesn't really have a spender and would benefit from a ton of critical strike damage gear and having the strongest corpse tendrils that you could possibly have, and potentially even using a two-hander, because the issue was always coming up with enough corpses to be able to output enough damage so that you could eventually kill really, really tanky monsters. Why do that when you can just Infinimist so that you have enough essence and then kind of walk up and then just kind of walk up and kill the monsters with a big old nuke? And you get Infinimist Bone Spirit, the build that I talked about when I put out my first Infinimist build, and I went, it's theoretically possible and I need to theory craft it a bit more, and this is the hyper scuffed version of it. It does all the things that Infinimist does, right? Huge cooldown reduction, constantly spamming corpse tendrils. And instead of worrying about stacking a ton of damage over time, which can't crit and can't overpower, you just worry about making sure you have enough essence so that when you come out of your Blood Mist, you cast your Bone Spirit. Seems like a perfect match made in heaven. Now, again, I cannot stress this enough. The build that you're currently looking at is Trash City. It's actually just my Bone Spirit build that I just put on my two-hander from my Bone Spirit build from all the way back in the day, and then just redid my skill tree. I haven't redone my Paragon. I haven't even really min-maxed any of the gear at all. But the core concept of it, and I'm not sure that I'm married to a two-hander, although it seems like the best thing to do. The core concept is basically building it like you would Bone Spirit, but include a couple of things that you need for the functionality. So we have the big two-hander with the corpse tendrils on to get the huge multiplier and a ton of crit damage. We have the ossified essence on an amulet. That is essence cost reduction, which is completely useless to this build. It's actually, again, just for my Bone Spirit build. But you rely on being able to move freely in Blood Mist. Blood Mist continues to add on a ton of small damage ticks with the shadow damage for more chances at lucky hit. You use Umbral on the build so that the corpse tendrils is always getting you a ton of resource, as well as Decrepify now becomes a resource tool for you as well since it applies CC. You still use things like Crippling Darkness, so at least the corpse explosions have a small chance of being able to proc that, so that now that's proccing a ton of CC and giving you a bunch of essence back from Umbral as well. Using good stuff like cooldown reduction, maximum life, plus ranks to the skills that matter. Blood Mist is consuming the corpses, so you can kind of automate that part of it, because the corpses doing damage is not really part of it. Like, you'll see that we have Howl from Below here, and you're like, oh, why are you trying to scale corpse damage? I'm not. This says huge lucky hit chance, better increased attack speed for corpse skills, as well as 2 separate lucky hit chances to apply CC for more Umbral procs. Still using Bone Storm to get the massive amount of crowd control, and then you're able to finally benefit from your +4 ranks Corpse Tendrils, +4 ranks, well, 3 ranks here, to Bone Spirit. Then you're gaining Unstoppable for actually having movement speed on a Bone Spirit build that previously really couldn't get a lot of movement speed. Seems like a good combo. Now, I know I'm not the only person who's ever thought about this. Again, Echo Hack and I theory crafted this thing months ago when we were first looking at everything that was available from data mines and everything like that. And then when we were playing in the press release, it was like, yeah, obviously like Infinimist Bone Spirit is still going to be a thing if we can find a way to make Infinimist work. And luckily, Infinimist does work. So now you get to play what potentially could be like one of the strongest builds for Nightmare Dungeon pushing in the game. I'm not going to just say that that is a true statement. Bone Spear is absolutely ridiculous. Infinimist is still incredibly tanky, and this build, as it currently stands, might be a little bit clunky. I'm not exactly sure, but I kind of just want to send this out to people raw dog. Like, you can just kind of look at it and start thinking about it yourself. If you haven't considered putting these things together, here's the time to do it. As it stands right now, I'm sacrificing skirmishers, I'm sacrificing shadow mages. You might get like, oh, well, what about the vulnerable damage multiplier? I'm not saying that that's necessarily the best thing or the worst thing. It's just maximum essence is really good on Bone Spirit. That's why I'm currently using it. And then obviously Iron Golem from the additional critical strike damage multiplier. In my Paragon, again, this is currently my Bone Spear Paragon. Do not take this at face value, but I'm currently using Control, makes sense here. We dipped into Flesh Eater just because we're consuming the corpses. Using Sacrificial because that makes sense as well. I currently have on Blood Drinker to be able to generate Fortify, but that doesn't really work here because when you're in Blood Mist, you can't pick up Blood Orbs to be able to generate Fortify, so you'd use something completely different there. And we have Exploit for vulnerable damage because we use vulnerable damage all the time. And then I have Essence here. Obviously, this is also for Bone Spirit, but it does say that your critical strikes deal an additional 22% increased damage to non-healthy monsters, and maybe monsters aren't healthy by the time you're actually casting it. Again, terrible option here, but that's how I currently have it built out. And this is the Super Scuff skill tree. Enough points to get into here. Max Essence, max Hued Flesh for corpses. Blood Mist makes corpses, 1 point into Corpse Explosion to get the Miasma version. Max Grim Harvest, max Fueled by Death. Decrepify for cooldown, max amplify damage, max Death's Embrace. Corpse Tendrils for vulnerable, not for Blood Orbs currently. Only putting in the point into Crippling Darkness, not even worrying about the other shadow skills here. Maxing out Bone Spirit, Dreadful Bone Spirit to be able to get more essence. 3 points into Serration for the additional crit, and then 3 points into Avulsion. Turns out Compound Fracture isn't necessarily great on this build because we don't crit on bone skills altogether that many times. Bone Spirit counts as a single crit. Now it does work with Bone Storm. Don't get that twisted, but you're a little bit light on points here, so I'd rather have Avulsion than the other one. Bone Storm, obviously, max Standalone, max Memento Mori, and then Ossified Essence. There you go. Have fun with it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you try out. Let me know how you personally min-max it, because I'm not going to have time right now to exactly work on this build, but I definitely think that this build should be on your radar if it isn't already. If somebody else has already put out a video on this build, I promise you, not trying to bite them. I literally just don't watch other people's content. I don't have time. Too busy making my own content. But if they have, point them here. Give me a link to their build. I'd love to see it. Why not? And I want to make sure that if anybody else says that they've already created this build, I'd love to give them credit. But again, thought about this months ago. Just wanted to show it all to y'all because I was like, you know what? I'm itching to just show it and try it out and see what the people think. But again, thank you so much for watching this pretty rough cut video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.